Hi, and welcome back to this week's episode of The Insufferable Experts. We are the three people you would least like to run into at a cocktail party: the lawyer, the founder, and the technologist. This week's episode is about building startup culture. Now, as the founder of a company, it's important to establish the kind of culture that you envision will be the most conducive to your company's success. But how do you go about doing that? Culture is such a broad term that it's impossible to encompass the entire topic in one episode. So this week, we're going to cherry pick just a few attributes. The source of inspiration for this week's episode comes from a recent Washington Post article entitled The 39 Definitive Rules of Office Fashion. And as many of our listeners are startup geeks, we are in the business of deciding whether or not corporate culture is a facsimile that gets placed over into startup land, or do different rules apply? So let's start with dress code, and I'm going to kick it out to Tyler and David and see, what do you guys think? We have objective rules of dress code that I think they've morphed over time many, many times over. Office culture is significantly less formal than it used to be. But even given those parameters, do you think startups still live in a different landscape?
Yeah, you stole a little of my thunder there, but certainly post-COVID.
That's my job, Ty.
Certainly post-COVID, we're talking about two different places, because I wasn't in a startup even post-COVID, and we had started to mesh into this almost like dress on the top and then sweatpants on the bottom, because we were all working from home. And I do believe, though, in the earliest stage of a startup, you're just heads down. You are this hybrid, especially post-COVID, where now everyone figured out, okay, remote can work. Like, yes, would it be ideal if we're in the trenches together? Yes. But, of all the things that you're doing when you're running a startup, being comfortable is something that you don't want to have to worry about, because you have so many other things that you have to deal with. And so I think that's why we tend to see, and tech has usually led the way on this, but we tend to see people being a lot more casual in terms of how they dress. Now, I'm not saying you walk into a room with a prominent client in sweatpants or something like that, but in terms of a formal dress code, I think that's something that really is up to the discretion of the people working for the company, which is kind of a cop-out answer, but I think it tends to be more casual than anything else. I know. But the thing I really want to touch on here, though, which gets really interesting, is when you're in a corporate structure, you're coming in, and to me, there's almost like a phase shift every single day. And this is what I experienced when I was working for over a decade at banks, consulting firms, everything like that. And it was, I'm at home, and then I'm doing this transition in the office, or I'm doing this transition to my calendar. And now I'm in a different mindset and mode, right? And sometimes that came with putting the suit on. So that came with going to a physical place. But there's usually a lot more structure and rigor around a day when you're already in an established machine, because you're a cog and you got to do the thing once everyone else is doing it. I think a lot of that structure goes away when you have a blank canvas. And so when you have a blank canvas, you have to figure out, how do I get in the mindset to be able to be creative, go and do something that I may not want to do because it's the really hard thing to do. And what I've talked to a lot of people about is they will use Attire as a way to flip that switch. So there are some people, I am not one of these people, just for the record, but there are some people that are like, no, every single day I wake up, I put on like a nice pair of slacks or a skirt or something like that, and a nice shirt, and then that's when I start my day. My father used to do this, not necessarily from an attire perspective, but he would wake up, he would get in his car every single day, drive to Dunkin' Donuts, get his coffee, and when he arrived back home with the car, the workday began. He was creating that transition for himself so he could get into the mindset to start going. And so to top it all off, no dress code per se that I've really seen, unless maybe you're in a very regulated formal industry. But people do use it as a mechanism to be able to work more effectively, which I've found to be a really interesting psychological thing. So, David, I want to throw it over to you, though. How do you deal with it? What are your thoughts?
So I think there are a couple of different things. First of all, I am one of those people who uses my clothing as a psychological message. And I'll get into that more in a bit. But in terms of dress code specifically, I think the answer is there is and there isn't really a dress code. There are some things clearly you shouldn't be doing, even if you're working for a startup. Like, don't wear a cocktail dress to your startup job. That's just not appropriate for the context. The way I
I'm
kind of
putting a
think
pin in this one. We'll come back to that.
Oh,
okay.
let's go.
So my thought is like, wear something that you would wear to a fancy grocery store, right? Like, so generally use common sense. Would you be okay going to like the local farmer's market in that? Great, use that for your startup. And secondly, there are 3 common general rules, I think. That's the first one, use common sense grocery store sort of idea. 2, they're kind of like event-based dress codes. And I've started to think of this as a bit of like code switching. Like, you need to decide the dress code depending on the context. Are you working from home? Fine. No one really cares. Are you pitching to a VC? Do not wear sweatpants to go pitch to a VC. Not appropriate.
Well. Sam Bankman-Fried would wear sweatshirts and play World of Warcraft like while
Sure.
pitching VCs. So
But he's also
And
the
we
exception.
saw how that panned out.
yeah, we did. Yeah, we
exactly.
did.
That's like the new Forbes 30 under 30. This is how we know you're going to end up in prison.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. exactly. Are you going out to dinner with a potential client? Again, code switch into whatever the correct dress code is for that client and that context. So I think that it's really heavily event-based. And then industry also really matters. Different industries have a huge impact on their dress code. There's even a weird thing in startup land I'm calling the inverse dress code. The Washington Post article says one of the 32 rules is suit up if you please. You can absolutely wear a suit every day, especially if you're in a rush. It's a shocking shortcut. You barely have to think about it, yet you look totally pulled together. If you work at some startups, especially in cooler industries like tech, the inverse would apply. If you walked into your startup job in a full suit and tie in some like tech startup, they would look at you like you're insane. It would almost be like an attorney working into their big law office job in shorts and a t-shirt. What are you doing? No, it's completely misreading it. So in some areas and in some areas of the industry, it's kind of like this weird inverse too formal is bad thing.
Well,
Kaylin?
I'm gonna interject there, yeah, because I think that's become a Silicon Valley trademark, which is the most casually dressed in the room is often the most powerful. And now folks have kind of caught on to that and are trying to replicate it. So now everybody looks like a slob, albeit their T-shirt is a $400 T-shirt.
Exactly.
It's a race to the bottom because we ended up in a place where arguably the most casual person was coming in because they didn't have to dress to impress anybody. They were the boss. And so everybody else is in the room is full of suits, but they come in a t-shirt, a crew neck, and jeans and sneakers. And that has become the power move. So instead of emulating somebody who is pressed in a 3-piece suit every day, which 40 years ago would have been the marker of success, now I think the blend of COVID, work from home, the increase in, frankly, just tech jobs overall, because that's largely been in the remote workspace since before COVID. But further, we give people some grace. If you are a brilliant engineer who's coding from your mom's basement, we don't really care if you're a gremlin in the dark wearing a hoodie that smells like Cheetos. But we've traded off a lot of presentation for efficacy. And I think that some part of that is great because there's an element of meritocracy to the shift from formal presentation to do you do good work or not? Now, I will go back to the sort of middle of all of this, which is to say that I am a firm believer in a dress for the job you want sort of ethos. And I think that percolates throughout beyond the walls of your work or your remote work, which is to say, if I'm having a meeting with a client, I don't care how casual they are. I am not matching them. That is not my job, because you have to think about, what does your platform do? What is your service? What is your product? Ours is for example, a digital platform for brand communities. What does that mean? Brands are trusting their brand assets, their goodwill with us. So now, do I reflect a sufficiently elevated alignment for them? They don't care how well the tool works if it's going to deteriorate their branding. So we need to show up from day one with a different approach, I think. And so I think a lot of folks do that. Lawyers, that's another really good, I don't care how effective and efficient of a lawyer you are. People are looking to you as the authority, as somebody they are meant to trust. And the way that we present ourselves, dress included, does offer that immediate perception. And when you are trying to build trust, showing up, and it doesn't have anything to do with fashion, it has everything to do with how much effort did you put in to come and meet with me? How much care do I think that you are going to take in negotiating my acquisition based on how you showed up and the care that you took to present yourself to me? So I look at it from a very contextual space where Tyler and I look like absolute gremlins on 95% of our interactions. But that is because we have established internal rapport.
Mm-hmm.
And I think an interesting element as well has to do with, well, fine, when it's just Tyler and me, that also is a different context versus do we have a team on this call? Do we have our own employees who are participating in these calls? How are we showing up and what example are we setting for them? And I think that can be debatable. Lots of this goes back to the filtering up to the culture title of this episode, in that it depends on the type of culture you want to build. But I believe that showing up for your employees is also a trust building exercise where they want to understand how much care are you putting into this company, because you're asking them to trust you. Startup life is completely different. You do not have a giant brand behind you that is 100 years old, and you may have a shitty manager or you may have a sloppy executive, and that doesn't deteriorate the brand itself. That doesn't detract from the overall brand. It's just kind of an exception, not the rule. We are the rule. We're creating the rules as we go. And I think every day that you show up, you are electing how to do so, and you're telling the world how to receive you. So it's very important. And I don't mean that in a, dress for success, wear a 3-piece suit every day, but it is incredibly important as a consideration for how you want to show up to clients, to your parasocial relationships, and your internal relationships as far as employees, consultants, interns. It doesn't even matter. You're setting the example.
And on that, I agree with you 100% about setting the example. There is a clip that I saw of Layla Hormozi of acquisition.com, and she was talking about how her team was kind of lagging and they were kind of showing up slobby on calls, and she was kind of like, what's going on? Why is this happening? And then she kind of looked at herself. She's like, oh, I'm showing up that way. And so she did the realization, like, I need to set the example. I am the bellwether that they all follow. So then she started to dress up a little bit for those calls, put herself together more, no matter how big or small it was. And all of a sudden, she started to see behavior change. And so that's something that when you start from nothing and then you start to bring people onto the ship, you don't realize these things, that you are actually the beacon that everyone is following. So with that actually, when we talk about culture, it's more than just kind of like how we dress and how we look, but then it's also how we set up what people do in terms of like delegation, in terms of roles, and what that type of environment is. So second part of this episode, we want to talk about the concept of being a founder and understanding when to hire and when to delegate certain tasks within your startup. So, David, I'll throw it over to you quickly. Just get some of your views on conceptually where you stand on this topic. And then Caitlin and I, of course, have our own point of views that we want to share too.
Yeah, so this is also really common, not just in startup land, but in also like lawyer doctor land, because the way you get there in the first place is do everything on your own. And it's very similar to founders. Founders have this tendency to do everything on their own without ever asking for help, which is great. And that's how you get to being the founder or a lawyer or a doctor, what have you. But at some point, that's just untenable. And if you try to do everything on your own, you're going to go insane and you're going to burn out and you're going to get outcomes that are worse for your company. So at some point, you need to delegate. But the big problem is if you delegate either the wrong things and or to the wrong people, it can end up taking twice as long as it would have if you just done it yourself, which entirely defeats the point of delegating in the first place. So the big question is, how do you decide as a founder, one, when to delegate, two, what to delegate, and three, who to delegate it to, be that an employee or some outside consultant of some sort?
I have
Yeah.
thoughts on 1 and 2 in particular. But the last trade-off you mentioned, which is if you delegate to the wrong person, you may end up taking twice as long, right? There is some concept of pulling the rubber band back to snap it forward. You are going to have to take the time and evaluate how much time you're willing to spend to sit with someone and teach them. As a lawyer, I did this all the time where I would just wring myself out because we were always under such a time pressure that spending 2 to 4 hours to skill somebody up or get them familiar with the deal terms was not 2 to 4 hours that I had at my disposal. And so I would just grind and burn the midnight oil and do whatever I needed to do. And I would do it all myself, right? But that comes back to bite you because then the next time you still have to do it yourself because you haven't skilled anybody up. So I look at that trade-off as, where can you carve out sufficient time and make the calculation of how much time you're willing to spend teaching someone, skilling them up, bringing them into the fold, getting them up to speed. You have to realize and appreciate that that is going to take time, and you really do have to carve it out. And then once you do, this doesn't mean that everybody's going to be perfect. You may still end up with a shitty experience, and it may be somebody who wasn't worth that time. But there's no way to know until you try, right? You can do all your best vetting processes. So you do really have to pull back to spring forward. And I think that that is something we don't often, we're so responsive rather than being proactive, we're reactive. And it's things are coming at 1,000 miles a minute. And we're just like, it's just easier for me to handle this. And that is where you trip the burnout wire.
Yeah.
Because you are just consistently taking more and more and more and more onto your plate without offloading anything. That is unsustainable. We all know that, but I do think that people tend to forget. They just aren't, again, because you're so busy or you're putting out fires everywhere. You don't have a minute to breathe and think, hold on, strategically, is there a better way? Can I sacrifice 2 to 4 hours of putting out fires in order to create a system, a process, hire someone, talk to someone, skill them up, and get them involved so that now going forward, I have a full additional asset rather than hitting the next deal or the next client proposal or the next whatever it is and realizing you're on the same type of time crunch. And so you keep thinking, next time I'll do it. Yep, next time I'll bring you in. Next time I'll bring you in. And that is a horrific cycle. The other piece of that is that I really do think that at some point you're going to have to bring them in, but I would dare say, don't you dare do so until you've figured out how to execute the task that you're trying to hire for.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are very, very prone to trying to outsource the things that make us uncomfortable, the things that are very difficult for us. And for founders, especially tech founders, that is usually sales. We are geeks behind the curtain, and it is a completely different skill set to get out there and sell your product, it's a whole different ballgame than building it. You can build the most beautiful thing in the world, but we're too saturated for if you build it, they will come. They will not. You've got to go out and let people know that you have built something. That's very hard for tech founders by nature. And what I see happen very regularly is people try to hire a sales team without ever having done that bloody, uncomfortable work themselves. And you end up with misalignment in communicating its value prop or bringing in the wrong ICP. There are lots of things that can obviously go wrong, but honestly, at the end of the day, it's just about making sure that you know that you could do it first. Then you can bring somebody else in. So that's the balance of like, yes, you need help and you need to ask for it, but at the right time and after you have figured out the right process, the right angle, the right pathway.
Yeah, and I think
jump in
the
right
most
here.
important.
Sorry. I'm going to jump in right here quickly and say, Caitlin, I completely agree with you. And I don't think that's just a tech thing. I think that is a founder thing, period. If you're doing this quote unquote correctly, you should be the geek behind the curtain who's really passionate about this thing. If you're not, I would question why you chose to start the company in the first place. So that also applies to me, like with a services industry. I don't have a product. I am the product, right? And I still hate sales. And I still find it uncomfortable. But an important part of understanding it is learning, what am I trying to sell? Because if I can't tell salespeople how to sell me, what is unique about me and what am I selling, they can't do it correctly. It's just going to come off as BS marketing speak like every third other lawyer. So I've had to figure out, as I started this thing, what makes me different? Why am I better, different, alternative than just a generic big law firm?
Right.
And I think that's an important part of understanding my own sales techniques.
And you both hit on something that I believe very strongly, which is there are a few core things that don't you dare outsource, to Caitlin's point. And it's sales, it's marketing, it's branding your brand, because that's essentially your vision. And the last piece is product. And we see this many different examples. We see a venture founded company that has a great idea, that gets splash cash, and then they go and they outsource the sales to someone else. And then all of a sudden you hear the horror story of like, we paid this sales guy for 6 months and burned X amount of dollars and we got like no return on it. Well, guess what? Sales guys are really good at taking a known value prop to a known customer and getting them to convert. That's their job. Their job is not to go out and figure out what your value prop is and who you should be going after. It sounds like it should be part of their job, but it's just not. And there's some unicorn salespeople out there that will do that, but that is not the average Joe that you're going to be finding. On the flip side, let's go to product. The best examples I can think of are all of these celebrities or influencers who have a really big audience who are then, now I need to figure out something to sell. And what do we see time and time again? They have this trust with their audience. They don't really get invested in the product that they're going to sell to them. And then they lose goodwill and the venture fails, or they lose money on it, right? And so that's an example of someone outsourcing product. These are very, very important pillars of your business, not to hate on, legal or finance or anything like that. But those are, I find, to be very horizontal across businesses, right? Numbers are numbers. Again, no offense to the accountants. And then law is law. No offense to the lawyers, but maybe some offense to the lawyers.
We allow it.
Totally.
This is a lawyer hater friendly pod.
There you go. But the way I think about it is you need to create this Rube Goldberg machine, right? It's not this like beautifully crafted, everything connects together perfectly and you've created this like wonderful machine, but Scotch tape bubble gum, but it works. You put the ball through, it kind of junks through jankily, but it pops out the other side. You need to create that machine across product, sales, marketing, branding. You need to understand it as the founder. And once you feel comfortable that you have a machine that's working across those different parts, then you bring the expert in. Oh, I'm the expert at marketing. This is pretty good, but we could level this up by this. But you're giving them a canvas that they can actually make beautiful art on now. You can't come in and just give them no tools to work with. And so when you think about it in that vein, it basically comes down to the shittiest, hardest things. Sorry, you're just going to have to do it.
Yeah,
But
suck it up, man.
the light at the end of the tunnel is when you power through and get there, then you can start raising your hand and bring people into the boat.
Absolutely.
And then you deal with different problems along the way. But at least at this point, you've gotten something going. And the best part is you now have all of that knowledge to go out in the world, and your vision will be stronger and your ability to operate will be stronger too. So I feel very passionately about this. This is really, I think, where you see a lot of winners and losers when it comes to building a company, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to do something that you're not good at, and you're going to have to power through it. And I think some of the best founders and business people that we've ever seen are the ones that can just put their head down and go. So that's how I feel about it. And something tells me that you'll know when it's the right time to hire someone, when you've got the machine going and you're like, okay, I know it works. I just can't do 2x of this, right? So like now I need people to come on the machine. Exactly.
I think that's a couple of things. I think that's a really important part of differentiating between outsourcing and internal, right? So I'm not the expert in this, outsource, right? Like I know I'm building my website for my brand, right? For my firm. And I'm not a web developer. I do not think I'm a web developer. I don't have the time to learn how to be a web developer. So I'm outsourcing building the actual building of the website to the web developer. But I am responsible for putting together the brand, and do these colors work? And do I like how this looks? And what is the image I'm trying to go for? And all that sort of stuff. So I'm taking all of that part, like the branding part, but I'm outsourcing to an expert to do the actual, okay, I see you have a vision. Here's what you do with that vision, right? So that's when you outsource. I think the internal is completely different and a totally different analysis of when you delegate. It's exactly what Tyler said, I think put it really well, of I've got this thing running, but I can't do double of this. I could theoretically do all of these things, but I can't do double of it. That's when you hire somebody internally, right? And so that's really different than saying, you're the expert, go do it. It's a, this is in my wheelhouse, there's just too much of it sort of thing. And I think that's the important distinction.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to approach it. And, we could obviously talk about this for hours. We'll have to do more installments of building startup culture from the ground up. But for today, that's where we're going to wrap. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next week.
And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple and Spotify, and continue to follow us on socials. We are posting the best clips of every single episode. So find us on Instagram, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.